I was leaning against a taxi door sitting on the street, and I was looking down. Between my open legs, there was a puddle of blood that was building faster and faster, and it was all the ways out to my knees. As I regained some sense of consciousness, I noticed that there was blood literally pouring like a kitchen faucet out of my head. There was blood pouring out of my nose, but then there was this odd sensation of some stream of blood pouring into the side of my mouth from the side of my face. There was blood everywhere. I could hear an Indian man yelling in the distance. My vision was kind of fading in and out, and I was coming to, and I would see people running around me. And I leaned back against this taxi cab, and I felt as though someone had hit me in the back with a baseball bat. Suddenly, a man started yelling at me that he was a police officer from Attleboro, Massachusetts. He saw everything that had happened. An ambulance is on the way. You're going to be okay. Just keep your eyes on me. Keep talking to me. Then I remember my best friend Alex yelling at me because he was scared, and saying that, oh, how come you didn't run faster? How come this? Or it just sort of nonsensical things, or maybe they made sense. I couldn't tell at the time. I had been stabbed multiple times in the head. I had been slashed across the forehead. I had been stabbed in the face. I had had a knife put through my right hand, and I had been stabbed in the back by a group of guys. And they wanted to kill me. I was sitting on the edge of death in that moment, and I began to think about my grandfather. That's what started to go through my mind as my eyes were going in and out. Things got very foggy, like a hazy mist in front of me, and then all of a sudden I could see, and things got very bright, even though it was nighttime. But the sensation of blood all over me and this puddle that I was sitting in, I didn't realize, it didn't make sense why there was so much blood, because there wasn't that much coming out of my head. But I didn't realize at the time I had been stabbed right in the center of my back by my spine, very badly. I thought about how wonderful it was going to be with my grandfather again, but then I thought to myself how upset he was going to be at me because my life had been so short, and that would have made him really sad. And I was going through all these emotions about dying, and I was waiting to die. And then all of a sudden, I was getting my clothes ripped off by paramedics, and I was being shoved into the back of an ambulance. People were yelling. There were lights, all sorts of commotion going on around me. And then I woke up in the hospital. That was 1994, and that was one of several incidences that I had had with that level of violence in my life. That level of violence was not something that was strange to me at all, but that was certainly the closest that night that I had come to death. And it was something that really, as a martial arts instructor, has changed or really affected my paradigm of knife. And in the Japanese traditions, I'm fortunate enough to have a teacher who shares with us a curriculum of tantojutsu that has both a classical context, but sensei being a former, a career military man and a former soldier, he understands that there is very little room, if any, for inefficient and unrealistic movement. So combined with that, and tethered to my own personal experiences at the edge of a knife and fighting with knives and almost being killed, I have a perspective about this topic that I want to share with you in this reflection. It's a little bit longer than the reflections that I want to offer you on Fridays. This is from a live stream that I did with my students, where I share the 5 principles that I personally teach from when it comes to teaching knife defense. And this is something that I bake into the classical format of tantojutsu. So if I'm teaching Western knife, or if I'm teaching a community of people who don't really want to learn the Japanese lingo or the kata or the kihon or this or that, they just want to get a basic understanding of how to start with some combative skills when it comes to knife, these 5 principles are what I'm going to teach first. And I want to share these with you. In my own dojo, we are finishing up the Kihon Kata, or the fundamentals of our tantojutsu. We're about to go into the Kata. It's an enormous curriculum. But I come at it a little bit differently because of these experiences that I've personally had in my life. And I'm going to share with you, and occasionally you'll notice I get a little emotional about some of this stuff because it means something to me. It's not just a choreography to go through some motions that I was taught by some man on the other side of the world. And it's certainly not something that I'm doing to make myself look good in front of a community of students. And I'm not making stuff up as I go. These are all things that'll get someone killed. This means a lot to me, and I want to share that with you. And hopefully, if you're an instructor, you're a fellow student like myself, maybe there's a couple things here that will bring you some value. And possibly there's some things in this that you see that I may have missed, and you can bring value to me. That's what I hope for. So I welcome you to this episode and this reflection of Shugyo on knife fighting. And I look forward to your feedback. I hope you enjoy. Thanks. Welcome to Shugyo, reflections on the path to self-mastery and forging the way. My name is Adam Mitchell. I'm your host and fellow student along this path. When I look at knife fighting, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be some of my colleagues in the martial art that I study or similar martial arts, while I appreciate and I want to appreciate, train, enjoy the traditional aspects of the martial art, there's a responsibility to the modern reality of ubiquitousness of the knife that I think we all have to maintain. And if you're going to put a knife in your hand and you're going to teach a student how to use it, then I believe that there are some real baseline fundamentals that you need to follow. And if you don't know what they are, then you shouldn't have that knife in your hand as a teacher. You should have a practice tool in your hand as a student. And I mean that with absolute sincerity, because I know that there's a lot of well-intended and well-minded instructors out there that are teaching knife basics, whether they call it tantojutsu or something else, but they really don't understand, how to train with a knife. Whether it's eskrima, Western knife, or tantojutsu, or any of the other arts where you have a short handheld knife. This is something that's very, it's common. It's in every household. It can be in the hand of a child just as easy as it could be in the hand of an adult. And it can be put in your pocket. It can be brought onto the job. It was enough to commit 9/11. I mean, it's a serious weapon, and it's not like a halberd or a spear or a sword. It is something that's every day. So therefore, we do have a responsibility. And in this conversation, I want to share with you my 5 principles that I feel should be followed by every instructor when it comes to knife. And if you're not an instructor and you're a student like myself, even though I teach, I'm a student first, these 5 rules hopefully will inspire you as well. So I'd like you to stay with me. And again, please just go ahead and post your questions whenever you have them. The first rule is to make sure that you teach fitness over choreography. It's very easy just to go on YouTube and do a simple search of tantojutsu, and you're going to find complex choreographed movements. Frankly, in the martial art that I study, a lot of it is garbage, and a lot of it, as a stabbing victim and as someone who's been in a knife fight like for my life, I can say it's offensive. The thing is that really concerns me is that instructors aren't teaching fitness. And when I mean fitness, it's not just about your ability to outrun someone with a knife. It's about your ability to understand how your body works, how the physiological changes that happen go down in your body when confronted and having to fight for your life. And if you're able to understand those and you're able to simulate those and train inside of those, then you're going to have better agency over them in those situations. Now, when we train traditional kata in the dojo, it's not always the case. However, an example might be, and it's actually more aligned with my 5th principle, when your body goes through physiological changes, one of the things that happen is blood comes up from your arms and limbs. And this is kind of like, you're going to take cuts and lacerations on the extremities when you're fighting off the saber-toothed tiger. Like the body knows that. So that's why you get weak-legged and your arms get
your palms get sweaty when you're scared, your arms get numb and limp. I had an old instructor had us hold our arms in buckets of ice for 3 minutes, and then we had to quickly take them out and open our eyes and then try to open up a knife. And this is an example of how you're going to fumble and you're going to end up injuring and cutting yourself probably when you're trying to deploy a weapon quickly like a knife, if that's your everyday carry. And you're trying to use it in a life-saving situation. First of all, having this understanding of how your body's going to respond in these situations, having an understanding about how your emotions are going to respond, understanding the freeze effect, and being exposed constantly to strenuous conditions is not something that you see in every dojo. And there are a lot of traditional martial art programs that will try to sort of integrate in modern stress tactics and experiences in reality-based martial arts that they may have gotten in some workshop or whatever, and try to sort of weave that into their paradigm of a traditional martial art. However, I just want to say this. If you are studying a traditional martial art, I'm going to promise you, if you go back in that art, you are going to find that example. It does exist. And if it doesn't, then, I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think you're studying hard enough. Those stress factors do exist because men during the creation of these arts, they lived in those conditions. They survived in those environments. Therefore, they were recorded in the annals of these arts that we study, and regardless of culture. In the traditional arts, they're there. Has that been lost? Well, I don't know. I mean, in the art that I study, no, it hasn't. Has it been passed by the overwhelming majority? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. That's why part of the reason why I'm making this video. So we have physical fitness. We have teaching our students to understand peripheral fields close, body goes through these changes, body wants to get rid of toxins. This is why you want to, defecate or wet your pants when you're really scared. You start to hyperventilate. You start to have these different reflex responses of your body on impact, on and on. As an instructor, if you can teach your students this stuff and you can give them gradual exposure through training, again, this is where they're going to be able to identify it when it goes down in their body. And they're going to be able to say, okay, this is happening, so I'm able to override that system, okay? Now, this is where, we also want to understand teaching things like the flinch response when you're startled and scared. My friend Tony Blauer, he is the one that really teaches that exceptionally. And if you've never heard of the flinch response, I would encourage you after this video or whenever you have the time to go and research the work that he's done. Understanding the freeze factor, and the majority of the people who are about to get stabbed or are going to engage in a fight for their life will freeze. And this is perfectly natural. Animals do it when they're getting ripped apart by their prey. How many times have you heard on the news, I was stabbed 44 times. I didn't even know what happened. And then, the real truth of knowing your body and your physical fitness to be able to have control over your breath and your lungs when you start to hyperventilate, and how do you override that? How are you able to run when you've incurred lacerations? How are you able to get out of there? How are you able to spotlight an assailant? All these different things an instructor should know and should be teaching if they are truly teaching knife defense. Now, if you're someone who teaches tantojutsu in a historical context to preserve the art of the tanto, then that's great. But if you're crossing it with like a prison shank, this I created in under 3 minutes, maybe with a pair of scissors, a pen, and a shaving razor, and a little bit of duct tape. And both of these will inflict the same amount of damage. And I think that is probably, this one might even inflict more because of its ability to be concealed and its ability to be taken out quickly and used and discarded quickly without trace. My second thing is, as I just said, is ambush versus defense. And training that, when we talk about knife defense, that a sewing machine is more of a practical understanding than large, slow movements. And understanding that how distance is going to get closed extremely quickly. How someone is going to be able to cover 20 feet before you're able to draw your gun out. And if they have a knife and they have intention, they're going to be able to close that distance very fast. And if you're a shooter or you're someone who carries, then you understand this very well, and you know these principles. Are you training in that environment? Are you training with that type of pressure? Rather than reading it in a book, are you actually doing it and understanding the difference between ambush versus defense? And another thing that adds to is simple movements versus complex movements. The kata that we study in the traditional martial art, I can tell you in the art that I study, we've got an enormous amount of curriculum, an enormous amount of kata. When you look at the movements, they're very complex, and there's a lot of different routines within routines, and then you can layer that on with different ways of holding the weapon, and then different postures and different scenarios, and on and on. However, a good instructor, and I'm fortunate to have one, teaches one underlying principle, one principle that you're focusing on, and you're using the kata as a laboratory for that principle to train it. And it's up to you to take it to whatever level that you want. Is that going to be in more high stress situations? Is this going to be in low light situations? Is it going to be in fill in the blanks? It's very, very mandatory for someone who's teaching knife to limit the amount of complex movements and really focus in on a short amount of simple movement. But meanwhile, understanding spatial awareness and response, and understanding that an ambush is always going to win over defense. And most of the time, people are doing these long cuts or these slashes, and okay, if someone comes at you like this, then I'm going to do this. And I think we can all agree that when it comes to reality, it's kind of nonsense. I want to share something that's very important to me when it comes to knife. That is, for instructors, especially in the art that I study, this is sort of like a request. If you're a teacher, please stop beating the hell out of someone who's standing still. I just recently watched a very highly respected instructor in this art, and someone came at him with a knife. Or no, someone came at him with a sword, and he was using a knife. And this guy with the sword stayed there. And he did this and that. It's like he's kind of slapping chopsticks against the sword. And then he does this thing, and everybody's wowed about that. And then he accelerates to 100 miles an hour and thrashes this guy. To me, it's a demonstration of insecurity. It's a demonstration of lack of knowledge. And it's an exposition of irresponsibility. And there's too much of that in the art that I study. I don't want to point fingers. I certainly don't want to put myself up on any type of pulpit. But when it comes to knife defense, it comes to the reality of this, I do take it personal. Or the third principle that I have is understanding and being able to work inside of what's called the life cycle of conflict. Oftentimes I refer to it as the life cycle of violence. So this is really understanding the holistic life cycle of violence. We look at it in the traditional martial arts. This is one of the things that I always bump up against with my friends who are more modern-based martial artists, where they're like, well, it's not realistic. You guys practice kata and da-da-da. And it's like, all right, dude, just, why don't you come into my dojo and do one kata with me, and then we'll have that discussion, because you're talking from something you have no knowledge about, or it's reference to a past experience that you had, possibly with an instructor who was making stuff up as they went along, which most of them do. For those of you guys who aren't into traditional martial arts, one of the things about traditional martial arts is where it's well aligned with modern reality-based martial arts, or even CQB, right? Where you're not even considering a martial art. It's like close quarter battle, close quarter combatives, is that they follow the same bell curve and life cycle. It is not just at the apex where a guy puts your hand on you and you do this, right? That's what most martial artists unfortunately train in. Traditional martial arts, however, are different and more aligned with reality-based martial arts in a sense that they follow this pre-conflict, meaning they study the stress factor of pre-engagement and escalation and the use of force continuum, or the latter, all the ways up to that point of no return, which is the apex of the life cycle of conflict. This is where it goes hands-on. This is where it goes hot. This is where it goes live. This is where the crime is committed. This is where it's life or death. And it's in that one little zone that we can all argue that most self-defense programs, most martial arts, they train just in that one zone. They don't study any of the pressure, the stress, the anxiety, any of the buildup. That could be long range back. It could go way back to indicators that may go days, weeks, or even months back before you get to that, and before you get to that point of no return. However, none of that is spoken about, trained, studied, understood. And then After that point of no return, you have post-conflict or de-escalation. In the traditional martial arts, this is a very important thing. In the Japanese martial arts, we have this very common concept called zanshin, and this is a heightened sense of awareness. And as you move away, whether you're in CQB and you look for cover and concealment, this is the same thing as zanshin. Or you're going into you're going into an environment. You're looking for exits and obstacles. You're looking at certain indicators, facial indicators, and recognition. All these things in pre-conflict zone. Zanshin is this whole thing in traditional martial arts that we study, where only less than, I would say, 1/3 of the container of what we study exists inside of that point of no return in true traditional martial arts. So in post-conflict, in more of the reality-based styles, you do see things like articulation of law enforcement, being able to recognize that you're going through this loop, you're having this adrenal dump, you're able to take agency over your emotional factors so that you can have proper articulation of law enforcement and first response. Self-triage, this goes back to principle number 1, making sure someone understands the biomechanics of lacerations and what happens and how you could be able to quickly do self-triage before first response gets there. Because I should say the rule that exists before rule 1 is that if you are studying knife fighting, if you are studying how to defend yourself with a knife or against a knife, rule number 1 is that steel cuts flesh. It's not a matter of preventing, it's a matter of minimizing the damage that you're going to have. Because if an opponent has a knife and you don't, you're going to get cut. You will get cut. And understanding in that post-conflict zone, or de-escalation, where you've created that distance, you've gotten to safety, and then you got to move on to security. Understanding what the differences of these are. If you don't know what these differences are, and you're teaching knife fighting, then I'm encouraging you. I'm not trying to bash on you, but please, you have to explore this. You have to understand this and train in this. My 4th principle is using the right tools, and this is really important. Now, if we are studying traditional tantojutsu, I think that it's an amazingly powerful art when taught and studied correctly. I think that if you study it correctly, there is indeed so much overlap when taught properly with modern knife. But understanding the cutting principles between a bowie and a tanto, understanding what the secondary tip does, why the mechanics of that knife are different than, say, a double-edged knife. What are all of these differences here with all these different knife types? And are you carrying some type of folder in your pocket that you bought at Home Depot versus a fixed blade knife? Do you know the differences even between those? If you're studying tantojutsu, then you absolutely should know how different areas of the knife are used in different ways and why. Okay, so there's a historical component to that. However, it overlaps with modern applications. But you should not take a bowie knife or a hunting knife into a tantojutsu class. When I talk about tools, if you are going to have a pocket folder, have a secondary pocket folder, and this is the one that you're going to train with. And this is going to be the exact same knife. If you're someone who wants to go out and spend, $200 on their pocket folder, you got to spend another $200 on another one and take the edge off. And that's the one you're training with. You're folding, you're rolling, you're moving, you're passing from hand to hand. You're constantly practicing, and you're getting comfortable with the movement of this weapon. That's mandatory. Just taking one of these stupid red oak boken that you can buy on any martial arts website and using that, it gets you to a certain point. But when we talk about tantojutsu, I'm afraid that eventually, in a very short time, you have to step away from that. And you do have to get to a point where you become familiar with the weight so that you can understand the mechanics, and thus you can go deeper into the dimensions of the art. However, if we're talking about overlapping the art with the ubiquitous of knives and staying responsible to the reality of modern era and knife, then we do have to invite pocket folders, fixed blades, more modern knives into that training. And if you are going to be doing that and you are using a knife, then it's mandatory that in order for you to become proficient with it and have familiarity with this weapon and make it second nature, that you have a second one, even one in your desk at work, that when you're on the call, you're constant, maybe not on Zoom, but you're constantly rolling it in your hands, you're dropping it, you're picking it up, you're moving it, you're passing it. You're opening it, you're closing, you're opening it, you're closing. You're just getting so comfortable with it. If you're not doing that, then you don't. I might say, and I might be as cavalier to say, is that, well, how much of a priority is it really to you, or are you just playing make believe? That's up to you. Okay, so that's my fourth principle, which is familiarity in using the right tools for training. Rubber tools, I'm not a fan of. Let me just get that. Cold Steel, I love a lot of their products. They got these popular rubber tanto. The thing with rubber tanto is that you can't use side leverage on the body. You can't do things like raking, which is using the tip and then not actually cutting, but tearing like you would paper through the target is one way. So just to kind of go back and refresh on these principles that I have from my own personal teaching, take them, leave them, that's up to you. The first is, if you're an instructor, please make sure that you're teaching fitness above choreography. Make sure that in that fitness, it's not only physical fitness, and it's not only fitness to be able to run or endure the fight, but to also understand how the mechanics of your body works in case of laceration and self-triage. Also understanding emotional fitness, because in the post-conflict zone, after some type of altercation or you have to fight for your life, you're going to be having you're going to have a chemical dump in your brain. You're going to be going through looping, all these things. Your ability to be able to talk through the situation is going to be minimized. And if you have agency over that, you're going to really, really increase the chances of you to be able to articulate and or to be able to get out of a situation or to help other people get out of a situation. If you have agency over that, it's going to increase the survival window. So these are all very important things. We talk about fitness, also mental fitness, your ability to be able to figure out these problems when you go to that point of no return, so that or when you're leading up to it even, and you can override anxiety and stress and solve problems quickly. The second is really realizing that ambush beats defense. And yes, it's okay to train in places of defense to give people familiarity, to give them certain case studies or use case scenarios, and to be able to go very slow at like that Tai Chi speed. But I absolutely am offended by people doing these movements, the uke or your training partner stopping and standing there. But meanwhile, the instructor just goes through abusing the person for whatever self-gratification purposes or desire to look good. It's insecure, it's ridiculous. Also, for those of us with a little bit of skill, it's very transparent. So please, my friend, if you're one of those people who, when someone comes at you with a sword and while they're just standing there, you're doing all these things to them, please stop. I think the time has come in our martial art that we can move on from that. Third principle is really to understand and teach post-conflict, whether it's, again, articulation, de-escalation, cover and conceal, how to move, how to create that distance, how to create that space, self-triage, going back to principle number one, and all these things. Look, Jigoro Kano, he knew that it was necessary to teach this stuff in the final part of Kodokan Judo, to teach healing and fixing the human, because if you were going to step into that art, you were going to get broken. If you are going to step into knife fighting with any sense of reality of understanding, then you damn well better expect that someone is going to get cut and hurt. And if you're an instructor, you need to know how to both execute on instruction and be able to execute on healing in the case of an accident or something. That fourth is, like I just said, the right tools. Making sure if you have an everyday carry, if you have a pocket folder, fixed blade that you're keeping on your person at all times, that you do have a secondary, and that's the one that you use for training. You're using the right tools in your training environment. You're offering your students the right tools to train with and to use. And you are running the gamut of different experiences, different types of weapons, whether it's unconventional or traditional. That's very important. Now, the fifth one, I'll bet if anybody knows me, they probably can already tell what the fifth one is. The fifth one is you got to train and stop acting. This involves sparring. It involves kata. It involves practice. It involves conditioning. It involves education. It involves meditation. It involves a lot of holistic approaches to being a competent and skilled practitioner of knife arts. It is not just about if someone does this, then you do that. I feel that these 5 principles are the most important for instructors to follow. I feel they're also most important for students to adhere to. We can go forward with this conversation into deeper principles of mechanical use, functional use. We can go into the mechanical differences of blades and how, different types of piercings or lacerations are different, what type of knife does what type of damage, and how we can go into the biomechanics. If the tricep insertion has a laceration here, how is the arm going to respond, how it's going to move, which just on that point I want to touch on. This is amazing because in the traditional arts, in the true traditional arts, these kata, you'll do this complex movement and on the surface it looks like one thing, but the true principle is actually the biomechanical response of the human body when such laceration is applied on the body. And how is this muscle going to collapse or trigger in or snap forward? And the whole body, cutting the hip flexor or these different areas of the body that were primary targets back in these primitive arts. How does the body respond to that? The traditional arts, they do actually teach how the body is going to respond, collapse, how trigger points are going to fire, how muscles are going to collapse, and you're going to get this response from the body that isn't overtly taught outward, whether it be in the books or on the videos. But when you look at it and you understand how the body will respond when that cut happens, and the body moves away from the cut maybe while you move that way, their body collapses this way. This is almost in every kata, the traditional kata that I've studied. My teacher has not, there isn't many times where I can point out that he said this. Oh no, there's one in particular one. As you train, you understand this more. So again, we see that overlap. Okay, we see that overlap, and this comes down to quality of instruction and commitment to training. That fifth principle: you must train and not act. And like I just said, that training comes down to practice. It comes down to conditioning. It comes down to sparring. It comes down and proper sparring, not just free sparring, beating the crap out of one another, but actually taking a step back and really being diagnostic with your movement, looking at it, reflecting on it, asking for feedback, leaving your ego at the door, letting yourself get cut. And whether you're using electrically charged training knives or you're using magic markers wrapped in duct tape, whatever you use, you have to do some type of free fluid sparring. You have to practice. You also have to have education. You have to have physiology understanding. You have to know how the body's going to respond. You have to know how the body is going to fall under certain stress when your body has to fight for its life. If you're able to do that and you're able to put yourself into that exposure, then you're going to have better agency. God forbid if that ever happens. And you need to just study, man. You got to study and you got to meditate. These 5 principles are extremely important. If you want to teach tantojutsu, these 5 principles are very important. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate and honor all of you. Again, I appreciate you spending your time with me here. I look forward to having deeper conversations with you if you choose. And if at any time, if you have any questions, if you watch this after the live, go ahead and throw them down below and let's keep the conversation going.
Shugyo is brought to you by the Yasuragi Dojo, a traditional Japanese martial arts school and nonprofit 501c3 organization located in New York. I'm your host, Adam Mitchell, and I truly hope that you found some value and inspiration from this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about our dojo, yes, it's an actual physical dojo, not just some virtual one made up on the internet, find us on the web at yasuragidojo.com. The link is in the show notes. Or go ahead and access our free mobile app for iPhone and Android. There, you can access our daily training, coaching, live streams, meditations, workshops, and both online and in-person retreats. Our work depends on the generosity of our supporters, dedicated students around the world, and you by listening to this episode. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel, and you'll be updated on new episodes and reflections as they roll out. And if you know someone who will enjoy the conversation that we had today, please go ahead and share. Once again, my name is Adam. This is Shugyo. Until next time.